Okay, so in the last video we set up our WASD camera, and in this video we're going to set up our zoom so we can zoom in and out. And just to reference, if I play the current level and I move with my WASD camera, we see that, but scrolling in and out does nothing. So let's set that up. So the first thing we're going to do is set up another input action. So the input action we had before for our WASD was set to move, so what we're going to do is we're going to create another one. So we go into input, input action, input action, zoom, open that up. Well, for the value, what we want is a axis 1D float. And this is because we want the zoom to move between -1 and 1 depending on where we're scrolling. And now if we hop back into the input context that we created before, we see our WASD that we set up. So under mappings, we're going to add another mapping. We're going to select input action zoom, and remember to select the key, and you can then move your scroll wheel, which will grab the mouse wheel axis. And under the modifier, we're going to make one change. We're going to negate this. And the reason for this is because when I scroll out, I want the value to actually be positive in this case, and when I scroll in, I want it to be negative. And that's the only change. Otherwise, they would just be inverted. So we hit save, and now jump back into our scene, and if we go into our player class that we set up from before, we see the input mapping that we have and our WSD movement. So very similarly, we're going to add an input action for our zoom on the event. So let's grab that, and just to make sure everything's working, let's log out what this value looks like. So if I go print string, sorry, we don't want that. We want this converted from a float to a string, and then when it's triggered, we'll see that. So let's compile, go to our map, hit play, and now when I scroll out, we see a 1, and when I scroll in, we get a -1. Great. So the goal for us is actually going to be to manipulate the spring arm length of our camera. So if we drag that out, and then here go set length, target arm length. This is the goal that we're going to want to set. Currently though, if I just take this value and set it as the target arm length, the camera's going to be zoomed very close, all the way up at 1 or -1. So that's not going to make much sense. We need to manipulate this value that's coming in order to actually have a proper value that we can set as the target arm length. So I'm just going to move this over here. That's the goal state that we want to set. So let's get there. So to help us, what we're going to do is this -1 and 1 represents our zoom direction. So let's save that in a variable. So I'm going to, on the left here, click zoom direction. Create a new variable, set the name as zoom direction, and set the type as a float. Great. I'm going to drag that here, and we want to be setting our zoom direction first. So when the action happens, we are going to pass that directly in to set our zoom direction. All right, so now with that zoom direction, we actually want to calculate our zoom value. So because we're going to be making some calculations here and setting a zoom value and using it in other places in our blueprint, let's set up a variable for it. So we're going to say zoom value, and this is going to actually represent the amount that we're actually using to calculate this target arm length. So we have that. Okay. So now what we want to do is let's actually on each of these scroll events, let's update our zoom value. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use both our zoom direction and our zoom value. So right here, let's drag out our zoom direction. We're going to need both. We're going to get this zoom direction, and we're going to get this zoom value. So initially, this is going to be, this zoom value is, the default value here is going to, let's compile that so we can see that, is 0. Okay, so what I want to do is actually take our zoom direction and scale it by a certain amount. And we'll see why. So let's take this out and we'll go multiply. And we're going to multiply it by 0.01. And then, with the output of this, let's add it. So we're going to add. And then what we're going to do is connect it to our zoom value. So essentially, what is happening is on every zoom action, whether this is a 1 or -1, we're multiplying it by 0.01. So in that case, if it's 1, it's going to be just 0.01. And then we're adding it to our zoom value. And then at the end here, we actually want to set our zoom value. So let's set our zoom value here. So in that case, the first tick, it would be 0.01. Next, this would be the same value, and this would be 0.01, so we'd be adding it, it'd be 0.02, and so on and so forth. And so what we're going to do is let's connect that up to here to trigger. And then with this zoom value, let's just print this out just to make sure. Oops, same mistake. Let's print this out just so we can see what is happening here. So now I'm just going to drag this over. Because we're printing our string, we'll see the zoom value change as I scroll. So let's compile this, jump back to our map, hit play, and now I'm going to scroll out. And on every event, you're seeing the scroll value increment. And then vice versa, if I scroll in, it's decrementing, going all the way to -1 in this case. So we actually don't want to do that. We want to keep this between 0 and 1. So I'm going to add one little thing here. So let's just delete this print string, and we're going to break this node here. And after we add this value, what we're going to do is we're going to clamp it between two values. So we're going to clamp. In this case, it's 0 and 1. That's perfect. And then we're going to set that as the zoom value. So I just want the zoom value being between 0 and 1. I don't want it going any higher. And then look at this. We are well on our way for setting our zoom camera. It's a little more complicated than the moving left and right. So if we wanted to set this, what we could do is take that zoom value and scale it by a number. This is just, we'll enhance this, don't worry. I'm going to set, say, like 500 here. So basically what this means is when the zoom value comes out, and you could imagine it being 0.5, this value is going to be 200. And then let's add it to a base zoom. So let's say the closest we wanted our camera to in our scene was, say, 1200. So I'm going to say, now every, say, if the scroll was at 0.5, we're going to be adding 250. Set the target arm length here. Let's have this trigger. Let's just make this nice. Now we should see when I scroll, the camera actually move in and out. So let's click play. And now when I scroll out, see it go out. When I scroll in, but it go in. But as you can see, we're kind of clamped here. We can only go so far. So let's enhance this. Let's make this more, let's actually have this work better. So I'm going to delete that. And what I'm going to do now is work on the zoom value. And to do that, we're going to need something called a curve. So you could think of our zoom value. First, let's make the curve, and then we'll explain. So go to your content drawer, right click, go to miscellaneous, and then you'll see an option here for curve. And you'll see this says defines a curve of interpolated points to a value over a given range. That's exactly what we want to do. So you want to click curve float, select, and then let's name this C_zoom. And then double click that, and you'll jump into this little window. Okay, so now that we're in our curve, I zoomed out a little bit, and you can see on the left here we have this on our y-axis, we have 0 going up to 1, and on our x-axis we have, let's move this over, so we want 0 going out to 1 as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click about here at the 0 and 0, point, I'm going to add a key. And then if I go over to our 0 and 1, I'm going to add another key. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this key that we just created, and I'm going to drag it up all the way up to this 1. So that if you see here, time 1, value 1 is where we're going. Kind of zoom in a little bit. And now with these two keys selected, I'm just going to hover over both. So what we're essentially doing is we're making a curve. The way this works is, so we know we have our zoom value that moves between 0 and 1. And you could think of this curve defining a function that will output a number but this x-axis moves from 0 to 1. And we're going to use the shape of this curve in order to actually get out a value to control our movement. And that's going to give us that nice ease in, ease out feeling. So if I hover over this and I, on the top here, click cubic interpolation, that's going to create just a nice little curve there. And you can see it a little better if you go up to your viewing mode and select normalized view. You'll see this is a nice nice curve that we're going to use for our camera scroll. I'm going to save that. I'm going to jump back into our player. And now what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to create a little function in order to set our target arm length. So the two values I'm going to need are zoom value. So let's get the zoom value. And then I'm going to actually need that zoom that curve. So let's create a new variable. And let's set that to zoom curve. And the type here is going to be a curve float. So let's go curve float. Oops, there we go. Flow curve, sorry. That's what, oh, sorry, no, we want a curve float as the value. So let's get that out. Let's go get. And if we compile this, now from our inspector on our details, when we have this curve selected, we can actually select a zoom curve. That's what we're going to do. So let's drag this down, and you'll see here the zoom curve that we just created. So we're going to set that, going to save it. And now with this, we're actually going to get a zoom, our float value from here. Let's go get float value. We're going to pop in as the x-axis that time our zoom value. And then with this, what we can do is we can actually, what we're going to do is we're going to use a function called linear interpolation. We're going to use lerp. And with the output of this value, what we're going to see is we want it clamped, similar to this, we want it clamped between two values. But because we have a 0 point, it only moves between 0 and 1, we want to actually have it move between another range. So let's do that. Let's go lerp. And then we actually don't want this going into the A. We want this to go into our alpha. And the two values we want it to interpolate between, I mentioned 1200 as the closest that we want the camera to move, so let's set that there. And the furthest we want, I'm going to set it to 5000. But you theoretically here could set variables that you can control in your user interface to control the maximum zoom, which can help with that. So the output of this is what we're now going to set as our target arm length. So let's do that. Let's drag this up here. And just so we can see what's happening, I'm actually going to also drag a pin out to print the string. And once again, didn't want the duration. There we go. Make this nice. And let's just drag that there so that that triggers and will actually print. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're setting up our pin. So let's save that, compile, jump back into our map, and now when we hit play, and I scroll out, you'll see the value move, and we go all the way out to 5000. And if I scroll all the way in, It's 1200. And you can do this quickly. And if you scroll fast, you'll see it kind of follows. There's a bit of an easing and an easing in and an easing out. And that's the nice effect that we get with that curve. So although it was a little strange to set up, it can be very useful. And you can define your own curves and however you want. But this basically sets up a simple zoom in and zoom out function for our RTS camera. So thanks for watching.